Welcome to the High Bar, your weekly watering hole for lighthearted conversation with people who care about culture that matters. I'm Warren Etheridge, your host and barkeep. I promise never to cut anyone off while encouraging all to think responsibly. Join me today and my special guest, homeless documentarian Eric Moseley, as we raise a toast and raise the bar for an awareness of homelessness. Homelessness is one of those issues that Americans like to pretend they've spoken about, but haven't really. Today on the High Bar, we aim to change that. I have with me a man who is essentially the Britney Spears of homelessness on the web, Eric Moseley. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
You are all over. You are the most famous homeless person ever.
Oh, wow. I didn't,
you are all over.
I just realized that.
You just realized that?
Yeah. I mean, I've been recognized as becoming the very first homeless filmmaker for having documentaries aired on opposite coast, but I didn't know that I was recognized up in the Seattle area for being that as well.
You're very famous. You've made more films probably than that damn Ken Burns.
Oh man, that's kind of deep. But what makes it remarkable is I did like most of my films when I was out on the streets. I didn't even have a place to stay, and I had documentaries on TV. Could you imagine that? That you can walk past a store and see yourself on TV, but you don't even have a place to live. Isn't that funny?
That actually what indie filmmaking is at this point, actually.
Oh,
like
okay.
Filmmakers don't have money.
Oh, okay.
That's
so
not
that's
so
what
different.
It is. Oh, okay. So I'm just setting the trend and just following it. What
right.
am I doing? Following or setting?
You're
the
living
trend?
the life. You're living the life at this point.
Yes.
But it is amazing. You've made several documentaries about living on the street while living on the street. It's not about somebody coming in and observing this thing. You're living the life.
Correct. And a lot of reporters who try to take on that task, I differentiate myself from them because they're like reporters who go down on Skid Row and they might do a story, but then at the end of the day, what they do is they go home. What makes me different from them is I go home probably to a cardboard box or to a shelter or something of that nature. So it makes it different because a lot of people who aren't homeless, and when they shoot these films, they basically narrate it. What they do is drive by with a car and film it and show somebody like living in a cardboard box. Then they go in the studio and then they narrate the film where I have first-hand experience on the streets. I'm out here taking a chance with my camera, taking a chance with myself, and I'm just like guerrilla style shooting, and I'm shooting and running.
Now, Eric Moseley, you've been involved in those pieces, those sort of journalistic pieces, right?
Correct.
And have you seen some of those air on TV?
I've seen one air, which was on KBTC, which was out of Tacoma. That was the only one that I seen air. Mm-hmm. The ones that aired in Washington, D.C., Rhode Island, and the other places, I wasn't able to see that. Okay. So the only one that I ever seen was the one out of Tacoma. And it was like 2 years after I did the documentary. So I'm like, okay, where everybody's telling me they saw the documentary and like, hey, it was a wonderful thing. The only thing I've ever saw it on was DVD. So when I saw it on television, it was, it really made me feel kind of like important.
Well, you are important, but can you tell me what it is that people and journalists in particular get wrong all the time?
Oh man, what do they get wrong all the time as far as on the homeless topic?
Yeah.
It's not knowing about it. It's not wanting to experience going out on the street firsthand and experience homelessness themselves. They sit back and they read it and they see it on television and they hear about it, but they don't want to take their penny loafers off. If you get my drift, they don't want to take the penny loafers off and they don't want to unbutton their shirts and come and take the 24-hour experience of being on the streets, because I feel that if you don't experience something, at least for a 24-hour period, then you don't have an insight on what it is. You can read all the books. I can read a book on how to live a suburban life, you know what I'm saying? But would you read it if I just lived my whole life homeless and I never lived a suburban life for 24 hours? No, you wouldn't. So that's how I feel about journalists as well.
They just don't know it because they haven't experienced
it. They don't know it, and then they're scared. And then if they would just take on the 24-hour period, they would look at homeless people a little differently.
Well, I know that I've always had shelter, always had a home or something like that. But I did have a stretch about a year ago where I had to spend 12 hours out literally in the cold, out in Utah, and it was amazing to me. No place to sleep. Tried to sleep in a bus shelter, things like that, and certainly not the challenges that you have faced. What is the toughest part? Is it the weather conditions? Is it the apathy of people passing by? Is it the lack of nutrition? What is the worst element?
Well, man, it's a combination of all. Basically, it's being stereotyped as being a homeless person. Oh, you're homeless, so let me hide my wallet, let me hide this, let me do this, or let me not have you around, let me put you in an area where I can always watch you. But then I ask people, like, okay, if you got a homeless guy that's over, if you drive up to a stoplight, right, and you see this homeless guy over here on the sidewalk with a buggy, pushing a buggy, he hasn't changed his clothes maybe a year, and you got this guy on the left side of you, he's driving a Jaguar, he's got these diamonds on, he's dressed nice, he's got his J.C. Penney's outfit on or whatever. And say, like, if you only had one lock on your door, would you lock it on this side or lock it on your left side? And most people say, hey, look, I'm going to lock it on this side where this homeless guy is at. You know what? If this guy is pushing a buggy, the odds would be 1 in a million of him coming to your car and snatching you out of your car, right? This guy over here driving this Jag, this might be Bertie Madoff Jr., you know what I'm saying? This guy who you're thinking, oh, this guy's got a Jag, he's got a house, and he's like, yeah, hey, baby, how you doing? Let me get your number. Oh, I meant your Social Security number. That's what I meant. So, so the stereotype about homelessness, there are bad homeless people.
Right.
But there are people who are non-homeless who are just as bad.
Right. Well, I know anybody that jags an ass, so I'm with you on that, certainly. So people obviously shouldn't be scared of the homeless, and there are some bad people, just like there are in any group of people, certainly. But what should people do? I mean, I think that's the thing, is like most people feel like homelessness is such a huge issue. What are we going to do? Should I give this guy $2? Should I give him an apple? What should I do? What should people do in that situation?
Well, there was an incident in your hometown in New York. This was just in the paper the other day. It was this guy, he was out in front of a restaurant or something like that, and he asked this woman for some change. And what she did was gave him her credit card. And she said, I'm going to wait right here, and I want you to go use this credit card, and I want you to bring it back. And guess what he did?
Brought it back?
He brung the credit card right back. Everybody on that block was like, wow, how did you do that? How did you give him that card? How did you trust him? It's just the same as trusting somebody who has a house or, a business or whatever. They may or may not come back. I mean, you have 3 classes of homelessness. You have upper, you have middle, and you have lower class. A lot of people don't understand that. Can I touch bases on that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, the upper class homeless is an individual where he or she probably has a job, probably trying to get back into mainstream society, who's probably been living with somebody, probably got put out or something, or maybe lost their home. The lower class individual is a person who's walking around, doesn't care about his or her hygiene, just is out there trying to probably get their next fix on drugs or whatever. The middle class homeless person is the one in between. Now, people who are homeless always get stereotyped as this, the lower class homeless, as a person who's walking around with a buggy, who's going to snatch you out of your car. When I was homeless, the majority of the time, the majority of the people that saw me didn't know that I was homeless, because I would go to Salvation Army, I would get new clothes, not new clothes, but new clothes to me, and I would take them, I would throw them away every day, because I didn't carry bags, and I kept myself hygienes up and stuff like that, so a lot of people didn't know. So I would hear people saying, oh, homeless people, this and that, and like, hey, look, you're sitting right next to a homeless person, and they wouldn't even know it.
Wow. So there's a class system within homelessness as well.
Exactly.
Now, in the people who do have homes or do have shelters, the middle class is getting squeezed. Is that the same thing amongst
the middle class is getting squeezed because he or she doesn't really know where they want to fit. If they want to try to get back to the mainstream, or either if they're just going to go and just throw the towel in. Right. So the question I ask people is this: if there was a person who came from another country, right? And they didn't know anything about America. And they came over to America and they said, hey, well, look, we need a group of people that we want to hang out with, right? So I brought them to non-homeless people, and I brought them to a group of homeless people. So, okay, they meet the homeless people and they meet the non-homeless people. And they go home later on that night and they turn on the news. And all the news that's coming on with the corruption and the extortions and meth labs and all this type of stuff, these are coming from non-homeless type people. So this person would be like, hey, wait a minute, these people with homes and apartments, these people are off the chain, versus the people who aren't homeless. So could you because I come to you and say, hey, this person is non-homeless, so he's got a meth lab, he's doing this, he's doing that. If you can open up the doors and the walls to some people who have homes, they're doing some of the same things that homeless people are doing, but you just can't see them standing out on the corner. So if people with homes don't want to be stereotyped, then do not stereotype a homeless person.
Totally agree. I mean, I know when I was living in New York that I became overwhelmed because the issue with homelessness is much different than here in Seattle because it's much more prevalent, or at least much more visible than it is here in Seattle. And I made my decision a long time as I didn't have a lot of money, I didn't know what to do, and I decided I'm going to befriend one guy. He was a guy who lived on my corner, Cornell. And when I left town, I was happy to tell my family, like, I'm out of here. And I remember telling Cornell I was leaving, and I was bawling my eyes out because for at least 10 years, he had been my best friend. He'd been everybody I talked to. I'd always like bring him food, buy him food, bring him clothes, whatever. Missed him terribly. But how can we assure, like, I felt decent about that, and I felt great that I made a connection to him and that I saw him as a person.
Correct.
At the same time, it wasn't enough to bring him, back to society,
Right.
in the typical sense.
Right.
And what is going to help get somebody like that over the hump?
Ooh, to get somebody over the hump. Well, I just commend you for making starting a friendship with this guy because not turning your back on him and recognizing that he is a human being. I really commend you for doing that. But to get them back into society is to educate them, is to try to talk to them, try to bring them to your church, bring them around people who are not homeless, is to be like, hey, he's with me. I don't care if he hasn't changed his clothes in a week and he smells like that. Yes, that's him and not me. But but for real, is to take them around some people who could probably get him back on course. Maybe he might have a problem with drugs. Try to get him in a drug rehabilitation program or something. Try to give him a little job like taking out your trash or something like that to motivate him to be able to say, hey, look, you are employable. Maybe not at Boeing or something like that, but you can, that you are not, you don't just throw in the towel. So just you being a friend to him, you don't know what that might have done for him. You just don't know. You just don't know.
So that's the biggest, best thing people can do is actually pay attention to them.
Exactly.
And it seems like a wise thing, not only because it's the kind or Christian or gracious thing to do, but also in this economy, it seems like everybody is just a hair's breadth away from being homeless.
That's right.
So you better watch your step because you could be there in the upper middle class homeless in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, that's right. So and I tell people that, hey, it can happen to anyone. Yeah. You can be just a paycheck away from being homeless. A lot of people up in the Washington, I came here, I lived in a lot of cities who were poverty stricken, right, in a lot of states. But when I got up here to Washington, I seen people who are owning all these big homes. I didn't see that many apartment buildings. I'm like, well, God, these people are up here living and not really realizing what they really have. But it's a lot of more people in the state of Washington receiving more food stamps and welfare benefits than any time anytime that, let me start that over. There's a lot of people in Washington receiving more food stamps than they have ever in the history of the state, of the food stamp program. So, and then there's a lot of people who are eligible for food stamps in the state of Washington who are too embarrassed to go get them because, hey, look, I used to work here, I used to work there, I used to do this, I used to do that, and there's no way I'm going to go get in line and get food stamps. But, hey, homelessness can happen to anyone.